We're reducing your hours to 10 per week. The words didn't hit me like a slap. They hit me like a slow leak in a tire. You don't realize you're in danger until you're already spinning off the road. Hopefully you understand, he added. He didn't wait for me to answer. He didn't even look at me. He just leaned back in his expensive chair, tapping a gold pen against his chin. The chair creaked. It was a big, black leather thing that cost more than my first car. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had already decided what he was going to have for lunch, and I was just a wrapper he needed to throw away before he could eat. He wanted me to quit. That was the game. I saw it in the way he wouldn't meet my gaze. He wanted me to get angry, scream, or cry so he could fire me for cause and avoid paying unemployment. I didn't give him that satisfaction. I sat there, looking at the man who had taken over the business 3 months ago. His name was Bricks. He was 30 years old, wore suits that were too tight in the shoulders, and had teeth that were too white to be real. He was the son of the founder. Bricks knew nothing about what we actually did. He didn't know the smell of solvent or the weight of a respirator. He only knew numbers. And he decided my salary was a number he didn't like. 10 hours? I asked, keeping my voice very steady. That is the final decision? Effective immediately, he said. He picked up a piece of paper on his desk, pretending to read it. The schedule is already updated for next week. You come in Monday for 2 hours, then we see where we fit you in. If that doesn't work for your lifestyle, well, he shrugged. He was enjoying this. He liked the power. He liked watching a woman who had worked here for 10 years squirm because he held the purse strings. I didn't beg. I didn't ask how I was supposed to pay my mortgage. I simply nodded, stood up, and walked out. He thought he had won. He thought he had squeezed me out. He thought I was just another middle-aged employee he could bully into resigning so he could replace me with a cheaper college kid. What he didn't know was that he had just pulled the pin on a grenade he was holding in his own lap. And the explosion? It wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be total. Before I tell you what was inside the folder I brought back on Monday, and how his face melted when he read it, I just want to say thank you for being here. It means a lot to share this with people who understand what it's like to be undervalued. If you've ever had a boss who thought they were a king just because they sat in the big chair, go ahead and hit that like button and maybe subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve. My name is Hannah. I am not a loud person. I don't like drama. I drive a sedan that is 5 years old. I pay my bills on time, and I follow the rules. Some people think following rules makes you boring. In my line of work, following rules keeps your skin from melting off your bones. To understand why Bricks made the biggest mistake of his life, you have to understand what I do. I don't work in marketing. I don't sell things. I work in a very specific, dangerous, and boring field. Industrial chemical compliance for historical restoration. That sounds fancy, but here's the reality. Our company restores massive, old government buildings. We don't just paint walls. We strip away lead paint, asbestos, and decades of toxic grime. To do this, we use chemicals that are so regulated, the government tracks every ounce. We use solvents that can turn a pair of heavy-duty work boots into a puddle of rubber if you spill a drop. We store drums of liquid that, if they caught fire, would require the evacuation of 3 city blocks. This isn't stuff you buy at the hardware store. This is stuff that requires a federal background check just to order. I wasn't just a manager. I was the designated license holder. This title matters. It matters more than CEO or president. Years ago, I spent nights and weekends studying for a state certification that is incredibly hard to get. Most people fail it the first time. I didn't. It requires passing a 4-part exam and logging 5,000 hours of supervised safety work. 5,000 hours. That is years of walking job sites, checking ventilation, measuring fume levels, and signing off on manifests. Because I held this certificate, the company was allowed to buy and store these specific solvents. My license was the key. Without the key, you can't drive the car. The old owner, Bricks's father, knew this. His name was Otis. Otis was a good man. He had rough hands and a loud laugh. He started the company with a pickup truck and a ladder. He respected the chemicals. He respected the danger. He paid me well because my license was the legal shield for the entire company. He knew that if I walked out the door, his ability to operate legally walked out with me. But Otis retired. He moved to Florida to fish and drink iced tea, and he handed the keys to the kingdom to his son. The son? He never read the operations manual. Bricks came in with an MBA and a lot of ideas about efficiency. He looked at the payroll and saw my name near the top. He didn't see Legal Shield. He just saw safety director on the payroll and thought, I can do safety. He thought my job was checking fire extinguishers. He thought I walked around with a clipboard making sure people were wearing their hard hats. He said to me once, in our first meeting, I don't need to pay her for 40 hours just to walk around with a clipboard. He saw me as a cost, a fat line item on his spreadsheet that was keeping him from buying a new boat. So he cut me. I went home that Friday and sat on my couch. The house was quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I felt sick. My hands were trembling, not from anger, but from fear of losing my house. I am a single woman. I don't have a safety net. If I stop getting paid, the lights go out. Bricks knew that. He was counting on it. He wanted me desperate. I sat there for an hour, staring at the wall. I thought about calling Rico, the foreman. Rico was a good guy, loyal. He would be furious. But what could he do? Bricks was the owner. Then I stood up to get a glass of water. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the frame. I looked at the framed certificate hanging in my hallway. It was simple. Cream-colored paper. Gold foil seal of the State Department of Environmental Safety. My name, Hannah, printed in bold black letters. I stopped. I looked at the date. I looked at the license number. I walked over to it and read the small print at the bottom. There is a lot of text on these licenses. Most people never read it. I hadn't read it in years, but something in the back of my brain, some dusty memory from my exam prep 5 years ago, started to itch. Paragraph 4, Section B. I went to my bookshelf. I keep all my reference materials there. I pulled out the state handbook from my shelf. It's a thick binder, blue plastic, heavy as a brick. I flipped through the pages. The paper was thin and smelled like dust. I found the section on storage of Class A volatile solvents. I read the law again. I read it 3 times to be sure. My heart had been hammering in my chest since I left the office. But as I read those words, the hammering stopped. A calm feeling washed over me. It wasn't happiness. It was colder than that. It was the feeling of watching a car speed past you on an icy road, knowing they are going to slide into the ditch around the bend. You can't stop them. You can't help them. You just watch. Because physics is physics. Bricks had cut my hours to 10. According to state law, for a facility of our size to store Class A volatile solvents, the designated license holder must be present on site for a minimum of 32 hours per week. 32 hours. That was the magic number. Not 40, not 10, 32. The law exists for a reason. These chemicals are unstable. They need daily monitoring. The state requires a qualified expert to be physically present for the majority of the work week to ensure the containment units don't fail. If the license holder drops below 32 hours, the facility is no longer a secure site. It automatically downgrades to a storage facility, and storage facilities are legally prohibited from opening any chemical containers. If you are a storage facility, you can hold the drums. You can look at the drums, but you cannot unscrew the cap. You cannot pour the solvent. You cannot load it into a van. You cannot use it. If you do, you are operating an unlicensed hazardous waste site. That is not a violation. That is a felony. I closed the book. I didn't call him. I didn't email him to warn him. Why would I? He made it clear he didn't want to hear from me. He had told me, to my face, that I was useless. He had told me my job was a joke. If I called him now and said, "Hey, Bricks, you can't do this because of the law," he would have laughed. He would have said I was making things up to keep my salary. He would have called me a liar. So I let him be right. I went to my computer. I opened the browser and went to the State Labor Board website. I didn't file a complaint about my hours. I didn't cry about unfair dismissal. I did something much more bureaucratic. I filed a change of status form. It is a simple form. It asks for your license number, your employer, and your current weekly hours. It tells the state, I, the license holder, am now working part-time. I typed in the number, 10 hours. The screen asked me to confirm. Are you sure? A reduction below 32 hours will result in immediate reclassification of the facility. I clicked, yes. I hit submit. The system processed it instantly. The state computer didn't care about Brix's profit margins. It didn't care about the library contract. It just saw the data. Hours is less than 32. Status equals downgraded. It was done. I slept better that night than I had in months. Monday morning arrived. I walked in at 8 a.m. sharp. The air in the office was different. It usually smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. Today, it smelled like money. The office was buzzing. I could hear the noise from the back. The crews were in the warehouse, prepping the vans. I heard the clang of metal drums being rolled onto the lifts. I heard Rico shouting orders. They were loading up the solvent drums for a huge project at the city library, a contract worth millions. This was the job that was going to make Bricks famous. It was the first big contract he had landed since taking over from Otis. He had underbid everyone else to get it. He needed this to go perfectly. I walked past the reception desk. The receptionist, Jana, looked at me with sad eyes. She knew what had happened on Friday. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Hana." I just smiled at her. "It's okay, Jana. Really." I walked into the main area. The boss was standing by the coffee machine, looking proud. He was wearing a new suit, gray this time. He was holding a mug that said, "Boss" on it. When he saw me, he checked his watch. "Glad you decided to show up," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. He wanted an audience. He spoke loudly so the other office workers could hear. He wanted everyone to know that Hana, the big bad safety director, was now just a part-time nobody. "You have 2 hours. I want you to organize the supply closet." He pointed a finger toward the back room where we kept the paper towels and staples. He was trying to humiliate me. He wanted the highly paid specialist to sort paper clips. He wanted to break me. He wanted me to throw a fit and walk out so he could say, "See? She wasn't a team player." I didn't blink. "I can do that," I said. I reached into my bag. "But first, I need to give you this." I handed him a thick, yellow envelope. It wasn't from me. It was the mail I had picked up from the front desk on my way in. Jana had handed it to me, along with the rest of the pile. But this one was special. It had the official state seal on it, the eagle with the arrows. The stamp was red. Bricks looked at it. He frowned. He didn't take it at first. He looked at the envelope like it was a piece of trash I had found on the floor. "What is this?" he asked, annoyed. "It's from the Labor Board and the Department of Environmental Safety," I said. My voice was calm. I wasn't shouting. I was speaking with the flat, boring tone of a bureaucrat. "Since you changed my status to part-time on Friday, I was legally required to update my license registration over the weekend." Bricks scoffed. He actually laughed a little, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "I don't care about your license registration," he said. He grabbed the envelope from my hand. "That's your problem, not." He ripped the envelope open. He was rough with it. He tore the top off and crumpled it. He pulled out the paper inside. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a white piece of paper. He pulled out a bright orange piece of paper. In our industry, orange means one thing: danger. Stop. Do not proceed. It was a cease and desist order. Bricks stopped talking. He looked at the header. He looked at the bold black letters at the top. Order of immediate suspension. His face went gray. It wasn't a figure of speech. I watched the pink, healthy color of his skin drain away until he looked like wet dough. It looked like the blood just drained out of his head. The office went quiet. Jana had stopped typing. The hum of the refrigerator seemed very loud. "What is this?" he whispered. He wasn't using his boss voice anymore. He sounded like a child who had broken a vase. "Read the second paragraph," I said softly. He didn't want to read it. I could see his eyes darting around the page, trying to find an escape hatch, but there wasn't one. He read it out loud, his voice shaking. "Pursuant to State Code 77B, reduction of designated license holder hours below the mandatory threshold of 32 hours results in the immediate suspension of the operational use permit." He stopped. He choked on the words. He looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. The smirk was gone. The boss mug was tilting in his hand, about to spill coffee on his expensive shoes. "Suspension?" he asked. I took a step closer. I wanted him to hear this clearly. I wanted there to be no misunderstanding. "It means," I explained, "that as of 8 a.m. this morning, this building is not a licensed work site. It is just a warehouse." I pointed toward the back, where the sounds of the crew were still echoing. "You cannot open those drums. You cannot load the vans. You cannot send those crews to the library." Bricks looked out the window. He could see the vans lined up. He could see Rico lifting a 50-gallon drum of solvent onto the truck bed. "But," Bricks stammered, "we have a deadline. The city expects us to start today. If one drop of that solvent leaves this property while I am a part-time employee, I said, it is a federal crime. I paused. I let the words land. Not a fine, I said. A crime. You go to prison. He stared at the paper. His hand started shaking so hard the paper rattled. It was a distinctive sound, the crinkle of stiff paper, vibrating in a terrified man's grip. Fix it, he snapped. Panic makes people irrational. He thought he could order the law to go away. He thought he could command the state of Ohio like he commanded his secretary. Call them, he yelled. Tell them it was a mistake. I'll put you back to 40 hours. He reached for the phone on the desk. I shook my head. It doesn't work like that, I said. The license is suspended. To reinstate it, you have to apply for a recertification audit. Audit? He repeated. The state has to come out and inspect the facility again, I said. The wait list is 6 weeks. He dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing bright orange against the gray carpet. 6 weeks? He whispered. We lose the library contract if we don't start today. We lose everything. He looked at me. He was pleading now. He was begging me to pull a magic wand out of my purse and make the consequences of his own greed disappear. I know, I said. I checked my own watch, a cheap plastic one. And since I only work 10 hours now, my shift is over in 90 minutes. I'll be in the supply closet. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the supply closet. I didn't organize the paper clips. I sat on a stool in the back, surrounded by boxes of toner and toilet paper. I sat there for 90 minutes. I could hear everything. The walls were thin. I heard him scream at Jana to get the state board on the phone. I heard him get put on hold. I heard the music playing on the speakerphone. I heard him begging a clerk. I heard him crying. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he was losing. I just sat there, listening. It was the most peaceful 90 minutes of my life, but the story doesn't end with him crying on the phone. That was just the beginning of the collapse. Because when you play games with federal regulations, you don't just lose a contract. You lose your shield. And Bricks? He had no idea that while he was crying on the phone, the insurance company was already printing a letter that would turn his bad day into a complete nightmare. You see, there was one tiny detail I hadn't told him yet, a detail about what happens to your insurance policy the second your permit is suspended. And I knew that Rico had already loaded 3 vans before Bricks ran out to stop him. That meant the chemicals had been in transit during a suspension, and that changed everything. I walked out of the supply closet exactly 90 minutes later. I placed the last box of staples on the shelf. I lined up the pens. I did the job he assigned me to do. When I stepped back into the main office, the silence was heavy. It wasn't the quiet of a library. It was the quiet of a funeral parlor. Bricks was still at his desk. He was slumped over, his forehead resting on the polished wood. The phone receiver was dangling off the hook by its cord, swaying back and forth. A low beep, beep, beep sound came from it, signaling that the call had ended a long time ago. He hadn't fixed it. I walked past his desk. I didn't stop. I didn't say goodbye. I picked up my purse from under my old desk, the one that was now empty, and walked toward the exit. Where are you going? His voice was croaky. He didn't lift his head. My shift is over, I said. I worked my 2 hours. See you next Monday. I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. It felt strange that the world was so normal when the building behind me was imploding. I drove home. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, feeling the vibration of the steering wheel under my palms. For the next 3 days, I didn't hear a word. I stayed home. I worked in my garden. I pulled weeds. There is something very satisfying about pulling a weed out by the root. You have to be patient. If you pull too fast, the stem breaks and the root stays. You have to wait, loosen the soil, and then pop. The whole thing comes out. Bricks was the weed, and the soil was loosening. On Wednesday, my phone rang. It wasn't Bricks. It was Rico, the foreman. Hannah, he said. His voice sounded tired. You need to tell me what's going on. The gates are locked. There are chains on the warehouse doors. The boss is running around screaming about audits. The license is suspended, Rico, I told him. The facility isn't legal anymore. Rico let out a long breath. I knew it. I told the guys something was wrong. We loaded those vans on Monday morning. And then 10 minutes later, Bricks runs out waving his arms, telling us to unload everything. He looked like he was having a heart attack. Did you unload it? I asked. Yeah, Rico said. But Hannah, we worked Saturday. My stomach tightened. I knew they had worked Saturday. That was the schedule. But hearing Rico say it made it real. I know, I said. Bricks told us to come in and prep the drums, Rico said. He said he wanted a head start on the library job. We moved about 40 barrels, mixed the solution for the first stage. I wasn't there, Rico, I said. I was part-time as of Friday evening. I know you weren't there, Rico said. That's the problem. We had a spill. I closed my eyes. How bad? I asked. Not big, Rico said. Maybe a gallon. Mike tripped near the loading dock. The drum tipped. We contained it. We used the spill kits. We cleaned it up. But you know the rules. We have to log it. We have to file an incident report with the EPA and the insurance carrier. Did Bricks file the report? I asked. He said he would handle it Monday, Rico said. But then Monday happened, and now the gates are locked. I thanked Rico and hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone. A spill on Saturday. Bricks had cut my hours on Friday. The state computer updated my status Friday night. That meant on Saturday, when the crew was moving dangerous chemicals, the facility was already downgraded to a storage facility. They were legally prohibited from opening or moving those drums. And they had a spill. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. You see, commercial liability insurance for hazardous materials is very specific. It has a clause. I know this clause because I wrote the compliance section of our policy renewal 3 years ago. Clause 11A, validity of coverage. Coverage is void ab initio if the insured entity operates without valid state and federal permits. If you drive a car without a license and you crash, the insurance company doesn't pay. If you run a chemical plant without a license and you have a spill, the insurance company doesn't pay. But it gets worse. Because Bricks had ordered the work on Saturday, knowing, or refusing to know, that I wasn't there, he had committed gross negligence. I waited. The explosion happened on Thursday. I found out later from Jana what happened. She told me the story over coffee a month later, and she was still laughing about it. The insurance adjuster had arrived at the office on Thursday morning. Bricks had called them to report the spill, thinking it was a standard claim. He thought the insurance would cover the cleanup costs and the mandatory soil testing. The adjuster was a man named Gareth. Gareth was a stickler. He asked to see the daily logs. He saw the log for Saturday. He saw the spill report. Then he asked, who was the designated license holder on site during this shift? Bricks had tried to lie. He said, Hannah is the holder. She's on the payroll. Gareth asked, was she physically present? Bricks said, she's a manager. She doesn't need to be here every second. Gareth checked the state database. He saw the change of status, timestamped Friday, at 5 p.m. Jana said Gareth didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He just closed his laptop. He handed Bricks a letter. It wasn't a check. It was a denial of coverage. And then he handed him a second letter, a notice of policy cancellation. Because the facility had operated illegally for 1 day, the entire policy was void. Bricks was now personally liable. The spill was small, but the cleanup wasn't. Because it happened on a loading dock, the solvent had seeped into the concrete and the soil beneath. The EPA requires core sampling. They require excavation of contaminated soil. They require disposal in sealed containers at a specialized facility 3 states over. The bill for the cleanup was $42,000. The fine from the EPA for an unreported spill at an unlicensed facility was $75,000. The fine from the State Labor Board for operating without a license holder was $10,000 per day. And the city council didn't just cancel the contract. They sued. They had closed the library for the week to prepare for our arrival. They had moved books. They had rented temporary storage. When Bricks couldn't start on Monday, and then couldn't start on Tuesday, they declared him in material breach. They sued for damages. They sued for the cost of the delay. Bricks was staring at a mountain of debt that was close to $500,000. And because the insurance was void, he had to pay it out of the company accounts. But the company accounts were empty. He had spent the cash reserves on his new office furniture, his new lease on a luxury car, and a branding consultant to redesign the logo. He had no cash flow. The 6-week wait for the audit meant 0 revenue for 6 weeks. He couldn't make payroll on Friday. I didn't go in on Monday for my 2 hours. There was no point. The building was dark. Bricks went bankrupt in less than a month. It was a fast, brutal collapse. The bank seized the accounts. The landlord locked the building. The creditors descended like vultures. I watched it all from a distance. I saw the auction listing online, liquidation sale, industrial equipment, office furniture, vehicles. I saw the photo of his big leather chair on the auction site. Current bid, $50. I saw the vans. I saw the computers. And I saw the building itself listed for sale. Bricks lost everything. He lost the company his father built. He lost his car. He likely lost his personal savings because he had signed personal guarantees on the business loans. He was gone, but the building remained. The chemicals were still there, locked in the warehouse, waiting. And the market still needed the work done. The library still needed to be restored. The government building still needed lead abatement. 3 months later, a large national engineering firm bought the building. They bought the assets for pennies on the dollar. They were a serious company. They had offices in Chicago and New York. They knew the business. And they did their homework. They looked at the compliance records. They saw that for 10 years, the facility had a perfect safety record. They saw my name on every single report. They saw that the only time the company failed was the week I was removed. They called me. I remember the interview. It was with a woman named Ilara. She was sharp, professional, and wore a suit that actually fit. "We know what happened," Ilara said. She didn't beat around the bush. "We reviewed the state filings. We saw the change of status form. You filed it the day he cut your hours." I nodded. "I followed the law." Ilara smiled. It was a real smile. "That's exactly why we want you. We need someone who follows the law, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient." They hired me on the spot. They didn't offer me my old job back. They offered me a promotion. "Senior compliance officer," Ilara said. "Regional director." My new salary was double what it was before. And the first thing I did, I asked for the budget to hire a crew. "Do you have anyone in mind?" Ilara asked. "Yes," I said. I called Rico. I called the rest of the guys. They had been out of work for months, picking up odd jobs. When I told them the pay rate, which was also higher, because this new company actually valued skilled labor, Rico almost dropped the phone. We were back. We walked into the warehouse a week later. It felt like reclaiming a captured ship. We cut the locks. We turned on the lights. I walked into my old office. Well, Brix's old office. It was mine now. The big leather chair was gone. The new company had put in a sensible, ergonomic mesh chair. I sat down. It was comfortable. We got the library contract back. We finished the job in record time. The city was happy. The state was happy. I was happy. I never heard from Brix. I didn't look for him. He was just a bad memory, a lesson in what happens when arrogance meets regulation. But the universe has a funny way of closing loops. A year later, I was traveling for a conference. I flew into Denver for a symposium on hazardous material containment. I landed late. It was snowing. I was tired. I walked to the rental car center. The line was long. I waited for 20 minutes, checking my emails on my phone. Finally, it was my turn. I walked up to the counter. "Next guest, please," a voice called out. I looked up. The man behind the counter was wearing a bright red polo shirt with the rental company logo. He had a name tag pinned crookedly to his chest. Brix. He looked older. He looked tired. His hair was thinning, and that fake, bright white smile was gone. He looked like a man who spent 8 hours a day getting yelled at by people who wanted an upgrade. He was typing on the computer, not looking up yet. "Last name?" he asked, his voice mechanical. "Hana," I said. His hands froze on the keyboard. He stopped typing. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted his head. Our eyes met. He looked at me. He looked at my suit. It was a nice suit, tailored. He looked at the heavy wool coat over my arm. He looked at the platinum frequent flyer tag on my briefcase. He looked at his own red polo shirt. His face turned a shade of pink I hadn't seen since that day in his office. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. The reality of the moment was louder than any words. He was working at a car rental counter at the airport. I handed him my license and credit card. "Just for 2 days," I said. "Mid-size is fine." He looked at the license. It was the same driver's license he had on file when he was my boss. He looked at the credit card. It was a corporate black card. He swallowed hard. I could see his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He took the card. His hand was trembling. He just typed on the computer, looking down, his hands still shaking slightly as he handed me the keys. Thank you, I said. I took the keys. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out into the cold Denver air, got into my rental car, and drove to my hotel. I slept like a baby. That's the story. He wanted to save a few dollars by cutting the expert. He ended up paying with his entire life. It's a simple lesson, really. If you think safety is expensive, try an accident. And if you think the person holding the license is just walking around with a clipboard, you better make sure you know what's written on that clipboard before you try to take it away. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed watching a bad boss get exactly what was coming to him, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had a boss who tried to cut corners and got burned? I read every comment. Stay safe out there.